Welcome back. I'm always happy when Bryan Young is here because we always have such a great time. The last time he was here, we dissected and served up the summer blockbusters. Tonight we're going to get a little bit more personal. Bryan is an esteemed author of several books, and as we were just discussing before we came on air, an inveterate everyday writer who's just got to get it out. And so tonight we're going to turn to his work and give you a little bit more texture in who our man, Bryan Young, politics and culture correspondent, is in the flesh. Welcome, sir, as always.
It's good to be here.
Nice to see you. You're looking well.
I try.
Good. So, we've talked a lot about the different venues in which you contribute to the culture. I thought it would be really fun and really cool to kind of zoom in a little bit on your writing, since that really is, it's kind of a cornerstone. It kind of defines who you are and how people know you.
Yeah.
And as we were talking just before we came on air, for somebody who has kind of a laid back, certainly a thoughtful demeanor, you're one of a pretty intense schedule. So let's start, before we get to the books, tell us a little bit about your daily schedule, about all the things that, as they say, you have on your plate.
Well, just as far as writing goes, obviously I'm working on more books and short stories. I've got a weekly column in Salt Lake City Weekly about geek culture. I write for Huffington Post about politics or comic books or movies or whatever. My last post was Mad Magazine's 50 Worst Things in America. You know, plus I'm the editor-in-chief of BigShinyRobot.com, which is a pretty intensive job. We do probably 8 to 10 stories a day on geek culture and stuff. I'm a geek, if no one has figured that out yet.
Newsflash!
And that's just my writing that I do, and I've got a full-time job besides, and I'm working on screenplays and documentary film as well, and that's my day job, is film and video production.
So I guess the question I have to ask first, because you had just made the comment to me about how disorganized you are, and I don't know, there's a little friction, there's a little static on the line as to how you can do all these things, and of course best intentions, but you know as many people as I do that have a lot of ideas, that are always excited about things, but there's not always a follow through, and yet you know your recitation of the things that you're involved in, especially as regards City Weekly, you know, Big Shiny Robot, your own responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, those are about delivery. Those are about follow through. So how does a disorganized guy produce so much?
I fake it really well. No, I think a lot of it has to do with just accomplishing things. It's a great feeling to accomplish things. I get up early every morning. You know, like I said, from 6 to 8 every morning, I'm at my desk, or I'm at a coffee shop, which I think of as my office,
sure,
but it's not
sure.
really. But my office is elsewhere, and I never get any writing done there.
Right.
But it's just a matter of I have to do it. I have to write. I have to take the words that are in my brain and put them out on paper or in a computer or whatever, and that's just how I'm programmed. It's been how I've been since I was in junior high.
And yet, as a parent, as a guy with a full-time gig, again, to go back, and I'm gonna refer to the Bradley Cooper character in why am I blanking on the recent film where he takes the pill.
I know what you're talking about, but I'm blanking on the title too.
Hey everybody, it's the pop culture junkies here with no proper nouns in sight. But his character was the guy who's always trying to finish the novel, and yet it never happens. Nothing ever goes forward, and obviously you don't do that, and you do have to deliver. So in the sense of that being a mirage, good on you for getting things done, because deadlines are deadlines, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to hold yourself accountable to a deadline, and that's kind of why I do the media, like the journalism stuff too, because I'll announce that I've got a deadline and then kill myself meeting that deadline.
Right.
You know, I've got a book coming out in June, and I agreed to appear at a convention. I'm doing a whole bunch of workshops as a guest, as a writer for aspiring writers. And I said, okay, I'll be premiering my new book there, and I'm still working tirelessly getting it done. I just sent the cover out to, I've got cover comps. I actually sent you guys a copy of it earlier, but I just don't want to embarrass myself publicly, so I have to have it done.
Well, and that is kind of one of the aspects of raising your hand and saying, yes, I will appear with my new book that is not complete, but will be complete, surely, right? Oh,
yeah. It's on track. It's going to take a lot of work, but it'll get there.
That's cool. So talk a little bit about, the idea of how do you become a writer, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but especially in the case of folks like you, you're kind of a born writer. So you discovered fairly early you had to do this. It was a cathartic experience.
It really was. It was journalism and creative writing in 8th grade that really, and I guess that is probably really early for a lot of people. And it's funny, like in 9th grade, I had this crisis of conscience, like, where do I want to go? Do I want to go into politics or writing? And I chose writing pretty early on. But I couldn't give up politics at all. In fact, I'm a precinct delegate for. So
very nice. Very
I was
nice.
at the convention last weekend, at the
right.
county convention last weekend. I'm at the state convention this weekend. Again, biting off more than I can chew. But it really just it is cathartic. If people could read my notebooks, it would be the most amazing thing, because I'll have conversations with myself. I've had conversations with characters I've written. If it weren't in a notebook and I were just talking these things, I think I'd get locked up. So it's something I have to get out. It's like breathing or something, and I think there's a lot of people like that. And there's if you're writing, if you're communicating, if you're telling stories on paper, whether they're getting published or not, you are a writer. So
great point. There is kind of a two-part process there, that there may be the great American novel that exists at the foot of somebody's bed in with their quilts and their comforters, simply because it is a story, it's a great piece of work, of literature that has never gone anywhere near a publisher.
There's a funny story Kurt Vonnegut told in his book, God Bless You, Dr. Kevorkian, where he went to go visit Shakespeare and all these people, and all of the world's best writers that we know of were all completely enamored by this man no one had ever heard of, but he'd written that novel, and it was put away and no one had ever read it, but in heaven all of these great writers got a look at it. And so Shakespeare and all these guys were worshiping the ground that this guy walked on, and no one had even heard of him. I think that happens more often than not. And really, you don't have anything to lose by putting it out. I know it's hard. It's sort of, it is a risky, emotional proposition to put yourself out there like that. I get that. But, there is no piece of art that someone doesn't hate, no matter how good it is. So.
Very well put, and you could flip that maxim on its ear and say the opposite, and yet I think one of the cool things and something that's fascinating to me in terms of kind of a longer term trend is that we've broken down a lot of the barriers. I mean, we can easily point to the internet, but I mean, publishing isn't a monolithic sort of totem that it used to be, where you have to get an agent. You have to go through the process of trying to go to Simon & Schuster or an academic, University of blank publisher and those kinds of things.
It's easier than ever to publish, and maybe that's a double-edged sword. So we are seeing a lot of stuff that maybe shouldn't be published or needs more time to incubate, and maybe even I'm guilty of this sometimes, of setting deadlines a little bit faster than I need to, but I don't necessarily think so. But a lot of people say, well, this problem with self-publishers and independent publishers and the big publishers, but I've been burned just as many times by the big publishers. I can't count how many books I read that had been published traditionally, and I just absolutely hated.
Right.
You know, so I've been burned by writers across all spectrums.
It's true. And yet, hope springs eternal.
It does. It does.
Let's stick a pin in it and come right back.
Okay.
We're going to take a break. We'll be back. More with Bryan Young on Mountain Views. Please do stay tuned. Cheer. Welcome back to Mountain Views. We are chatting with our esteemed colleague and regular guest, Bryan Young, author and all-around media entrepreneur who's in the studio with us tonight. And before the break, we were just getting started talking a little more specifically about some of his works that he has authored. I thought it was a great segue that you were speaking of Kurt Vonnegut and of, God bless you, Dr. Kevorkian. So let's just turn the gem slightly and see the different facet of, God bless you, Kurt Vonnegut, which I've been enjoying, and a fantastic work of yours. And as I mentioned, it's a thrill to know someone and to get to read their writing. But give folks a little bit of an idea, because I don't think we've talked about that book here on the show before.
God Bless You, Mr. Vonnegut's a collection of short stories and essays and things I've written that I felt were directly inspired by Kurt Vonnegut and his work or his voice or his moral influence on me. I think he is certainly one of the people I'd have to list as major influences on my personal moral code or whatever. He's just a great, kind-hearted sort of writer, and there was something very humane about all of that. And God Bless You, Mr. Vonnegut is sort of my, I don't want to say love letter to him, but it was, you know, the book includes letters I wrote to him that I regret never sending. Yes.
Poignant detail,
yeah,
for sure.
My obituary that I wrote for Huffington Post for him. Some of my Huffington Post material that I felt was directly inspired by him. And through the chapters, I really kind of guided people through what it was of Vonnegut's that they should check out that inspired my piece. And it's been, I think the response to it has been pretty good, and I had a lot of fun putting it together. And you know, it was interesting to look back at all the work over the years and see how personal some of it was. And you know, I read it and, you know, read some of the pieces and go, wow, I can't believe I actually put that out there publicly, you know.
Well, it occurs to me that that particular work is something that, in a way, I kind of wish existed for other writers, for more writers. And in a way, it's like you could almost subtitle it, right? It's like it's the modern thing that if the title of your book doesn't take at least a minute and a half to recite, that, you know, you haven't written a long enough subtitle for the actual title of your book. But what comes to mind for me is sort of the essential companion piece for understanding and appreciating the collected works of Bryan Young. And
yeah, it definitely has a cross section of the kind of stuff I do. You know, there's short stories that are very personal and contemporary. There's some science fiction short stories. There's a lot of my political opinions in there, which maybe might rub people the wrong way. Some people, and other people, they'll you know, cheer me on. But you know, that's what's interesting about it. I always love reading columns from people on any side of any issue, because it's fascinating to really get that perspective.
It occurs to me that candor in some ways is, I don't know, it's such a delicious companion to great reading, especially, like you say, reading columnists, and I have a number of columnists to whom I'm very loyal, big David Brooks fan, big Nicholas Kristof fan, and they provide you with so much in the context of that particular format. But as far as your longer works and your fiction works go, I think that within kind of literature as opposed to periodical journalism, which you do a lot of as well, that this particular work, and I definitely got, you know, the warm smile and the chuckle when you start off right off the bat talking about, you know, who this guy was to you. And obviously you don't have to explain Kurt Vonnegut to people, but the fact that you kind of made it personal, how he impacted you early on, and how his voice, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it kind of brought out in you this sort of kinship, this kindred spirit aspect that was very natural. It was already there in a way.
It really did. Every time I read a Kurt Vonnegut novel, and I go back and read his stuff a lot, and I've been really enjoying all the stuff they've been publishing posthumously, but every time you read one of his books, you feel like you're sitting down next to a fire with an old friend. And I really loved that about his books, and even when the books don't feature him as a character at all, they always have some sort of foreword or something that brings him into it, and you can always feel his presence there. And I felt like when he passed away, I really did feel like I lost an old friend, but I was grateful that I could go back and visit him. And when I was putting together my homage to him, I really wanted to try to replicate that feeling. So hopefully even if people don't know me personally, that they'll get that impression that maybe after reading this book, maybe they will, a little bit.
And a great point, because part of the endeavor in writing and publishing especially is to reach people that you can't necessarily sit down and have a cup of coffee with or get to know, whether it be because of lack of physical proximity or whatever, but that there's something about the impact that Kurt Vonnegut had that is a uniting factor. When people go, oh, Bryan Young, that guy gets it. He gets Kurt Vonnegut, and that's my man.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of people who read the book too who haven't read any Vonnegut, and they still felt like that it was sort of that. I think that's the perfect way to put it. Like, this book is sort of like sitting down and having a cup of coffee with me, and we talk about my writing influences.
Absolutely. And that personal aspect to it, and the first person, which again, as you say, Vonnegut does a great deal of. And I wonder, here's a question for you, did that kind of did you feel as though that gave you permission in reading and knowing in reading Kurt Vonnegut that, hey, this is a big time guy. This guy is lauded, and it's on its face. I mean, he without question, he's one of the great American writers. That gives you permission too? Well,
a little bit. I think one of the things is that my experience with him like that, I've talked to a lot of writers like me, and I don't think that is unique. I think that one of the unique things about Kurt Vonnegut is that he did give that to people, to everybody, and it's sort of a universal that his work was so personalized but so universal that it made everyone feel that personal connection.
And that getting those two things done at once, incredible. Hey, we got to go. We got more books to talk about, but you're going to be back, so we'll continue doing that. Always a pleasure to see you. Nice work. Keep up the good work. We got to go.